evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I read a column in the paper last week that was really gripping about a young lady who had a sexual assault, and this happened numerous decades ago, and she was writing about it today, and hasn't been, as far as I know, proven in court, but it was quite the story. And so I thought it would be really interesting to reach out to Jane Boon, who's got a PhD in engineering, and she's now a novelist. And I think you now live in New York City, and hear a little bit more about her story, because I think it's a story of resilience, of sexual assault, of changed attitudes within business and within society. And I think there's some lessons to be learned. So Jane Boon, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Brian. I'm really grateful for the time and the opportunity to explain, what things were like in the workplace in the 80s when I was a teenager and a co-op student. And thank goodness how much they've changed now, because it's a very different sexual landscape, if you will, versus then. But to set the scene, I was hired by Magna. I was chosen for this big corporate sponsorship to attend General Motors Institute, which is a very prestigious engineering school in Michigan. And it was a deal that would have had me toggling between Magna for 3 months and then attending school for 3 months, back and forth, with the idea that we sponsorship recipients would be groomed for the executive suite at Magna. We would be indoctrinated. We would having an opportunity to work on the floor, but then also in positions of gradual responsibility. It was a really unique and a really well-considered program. So I turned down offers from Waterloo University, Royal Military College. I was an excellent student to go to this very distinctive program where even the CEO of Magna, Frank Stronach, was my final interviewer for the opportunity. And so the idea that I was going to be at the ground floor of a company that was on the ascendancy, because in the 80s, in 1985, when I was 17 and hired in, Magna had 70 or 80 plants, revenues under $1 billion, but it was clearly poised to do more. So it was exciting to be there. And I received a fair bit of attention from Stronach. And to be blunt, I never attributed it to my gender. I always thought it was because I was a straight A student and I was very naive. I was a nerd. And so this put me in a very strange situation. On one occasion, when I was in my first year, I was at head office and Stronach spotted me and he invited me into his office where he philosophized for 30 minutes, but also engaging me in a conversation about my engineering dreams and how they would dovetail with Magna's plans. And so I was just predisposed to think that this was the best company that I could have associated with. And that, of course, changed the day of the annual shareholders meeting in 1986, when Stronach spotted me as I was entering Roy Thompson Hall. And let me just say, I was a teenager still. I was 19 years old. And he invited me to the corporate after party at Rooney's that night. And I was pretty gutsy. I thought this sounded like a great opportunity to see the executives in their natural habitat, doing whatever it is that executives do behind closed doors. So I went. And quite frankly, that evening changed my life in a bunch of ways.
How did it change your life?
Well, so I was 19, so I was sure I was going to get kicked out if they realized how young I was. So I'm hanging out at the bar, just trying to be very small and inconspicuous, when Stronach arrived, and he sees me and he waves me over to him, and he's talking to another gentleman, and he takes my hand and he's shaking it and holding it while he's still talking to this other guy. So I was like there, kind of stuck next to him for a minute, wondering what I was supposed to do. But finally the guy left, and then he invited me to join him for dinner. And the CEO invites you to dinner, you say yes. So I sat beside Stronach all evening at the
Is this
table.
a table of two or a table of?
I think that had about 8 people at its max. I mean, it was a very dynamic table. It was a hot night. Magnus corporate results had been excellent. Stronach was like prom king. He got a lot of attention. People were drifting by to congratulate him. At one point, we had Bill Davis at our table, the prior Premier of Ontario, who had also been a board member. I mean, I was just taking it in, kind of awed by, how things operate at this high level. And I was working in Guelph at the time. I was writing software for a company that made presses. And upon learning this, Stronach turned to his assistant and asked her if the guest house was available for my use, because it was a long drive back to Guelph. And she immediately said it was available, told me that this was a really great offer. As a teenager, I had never been offered the use of a house before. Like, that just doesn't happen to me, just casually being offered a fancy guest house. But I said no. Not long later, once again, I was offered the use of this house again. And once again, I declined. No, it's only an hour back to Guelph. I'll be fine. And then Stronach's a dancer. So there was a dance floor. Like, Rooney's was a restaurant that he owned, presumably built to his specifications. There was this seating, there was the bar, there was the dance floor, there was the restaurant area. There were lots of people paying attention to how low our wine glasses got and whether, the king wanted something to eat or drink. But otherwise, we were sort of left alone. So there was this moment, for instance, after we danced, where Stronach and I are sitting by ourselves.
Sorry, I apologize. You jumped ahead, and so he asked you to dance.
He asked me to dance, and we danced. I mean, and I wasn't, I don't think, well known within the company, but I'm sure anybody who asked would figure out that I was one of those expensive co-op students, because it was a very rich field. They were very generous to us, and we all had mentors at the highest level of the company, and it was, we were pretty serious cost item that I'm sure HR and accounting kind of rolled their eyes at. So we danced, and then we sat down, and the maitre d' comes by and asks Stronach if we would like strawberries in a Grand Marnier sauce. I remember it was such specificity. And I had been sipping wine and eating food I didn't care for all night, so I passed. But Stronach was down for the berries. And so this bowl arrived in front of him, and he started to feed me berries in his fingers. Like, the first berry came out, and I'm looking around trying to figure out if this was for real. I mean, had I somehow hallucinated this berry? Because who does that? And nobody's looking. I'm like, okay. So I eat it. What am I supposed to do? So a second berry arrives, and I'm looking around again, and once again, nobody's looking. So I eat it, and I'm like, what the hell am I supposed to do? This is wild and wildly inappropriate, and I really want this to stop. So I was like, sort of indexing through my brain on how I could sort of shut down this berry business. And then I thought, oh, this is funny. I'll bite the hand that feeds me. So I turned to Stronach and I say, if you do that again, Mr. Stronach, I'm going to bite you. And when you know it, he calls my bluff. So this third strawberry comes at me. I eat it. I'm looking around this time, making sure there are no witnesses, because I grabbed his hand and I bit it. And I mean, we're not talking like a sexy little nibble. I mean, it was a chomp, like not the kind that would give him rabies or anything, but I hoped it would give him pause. And that was the end of the strawberries business. But to be frank, I hadn't outsmarted him, because not long after that, the driver arrived to get his marching orders for the evening. And it was at this moment that Stronach announced that I had had too much to drink, that he would take me to the guest house in Gormley, and that the driver would take my car. And then he just turned to me and said, Jane, give him your keys and like an obedient little moron, I passed over my keys to the driver, explained where he could find my car. And then it dawned on me, oh boy, I just did something really stupid. I think I have to sleep with this guy now. I think this is where it's going. I mean, and I just couldn't figure out how to get out of it. So Stronach took me out of this crowded restaurant filled with colleagues from Magna, employees at Rooney's. I'm like doing the walk of shame. Like, I know everybody's looking at me, or I imagine they're looking at me thinking, oh my goodness, well, we know what snack he's got tonight. And we get in the car, and the whole time I'm in the car, I'm like trying to figure out how to get out of this. Like, do I cry? Do I say I've got my period? What can I do to stop this train wreck before it crashes? And I drew a blank. So I was like, okay, engineers are tough. I guess I can do it. What's it going to take? 30 minutes? I can do that. But this was all in my head because, like, he never asked me what I wanted. He never discussed what we were going to do. It was just this rush towards the guest house and the bed. And I was 19 years old. I was a very unsophisticated kid. I had no clue how I was supposed to interrupt this.
My God, what a story, what a experience. We're going to take a break for some messages, and we're going to come back and hear what happened at the guest house and what happened after the guest house from Jane Boon. I don't know what to say. We're going to be back in 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Jane Boon. She is a PhD in engineering. She's a novelist. She wrote a column in the paper just last week about her experience with Frank Stronach, 3 decades ago, I guess. 3 or 4 decades ago.
1986. It was a long time ago. I mean, it's a bit mortifying to think it could be that long, but I remember it so vividly because, quite frankly, it was an inflection point in my life. You look back with the benefit of the hindsight, and you can see the moment these threads appear and where they've taken you and where they've taken me. So we arrived at the guest house, and it was like this terrifying climb up the stairs. And I think in his head, it must have been some grand seduction because he did this thing where he like opened the curtains to show me the view. And it was a very pretty view. It's a Simeon Park, which is a corporate park that Magna offers its employees for. I played softball there. And then I had never been with somebody with moves before. I mean, I was just sort of astonished, like, oh my God, my bra came off without resistance. How did that happen? Whoa, this is all happening so fast. Okay, well, at least it'll be over fast was sort of my thinking. So I was just very passive and very overwhelmed and freaked out. I don't think I said a word as it was happening. And then mercifully, it was over quite quickly. He was very efficient. And then he left because presumably he went home to his wife. So I was stuck lying there in this fabulous guest house in this big bed going, oh my God, now what do I do? Can I really stay at a company where I've seen the CEO naked? I mean, can I really function in a place where I can't help but wonder if people think I'm a slut? Like, I had suddenly become a woman who has sex with the boss, even though I was like a nerd determined to get A's on the hardest calculus courses. This was just so unsettling and unnerving for me. So I made a very cold decision, which was that I was so junior. I mean, I was in the second year of a sponsorship program that I could just avoid the guy. Like, if I hid in a bathroom, there was no way he could get me. I really didn't think that he'd want to repeat because let's face it, I was frozen and not fun. And so I just resolved to stay put. I didn't want to lose the 2 years I'd invested in my engineering education and have like a big question mark over top. Because let's face it, if I had left, I would have had to start fresh somewhere because none of my classes would have transferred. And then there would be people who would wonder what had happened at Magna. Had I freaked out? Had I flunked out? Where the truth was far stranger and far more embarrassing. You know, where I talk about it easily now. When I was a teenager, like this stuff is not something that I ever discussed, except with a couple close friends.
So you told a couple of people at the time.
I did because I really didn't know what to do, but I made sure that I didn't tell anybody important who might require me to do something. So I never told my family. I never told HR. I never told anybody official at the university because Stronach was also on the board at GMI. So, I mean, our lives were so intermingled that I decided the safest and most efficient thing for me to do was just to put my head down, work hard, and then get the hell out, which is what I did. I wound up going to MIT for grad school and then leaving the auto industry, which, you know, was a relief because I didn't want to stick around, you know, that kind of milieu because who knows, were they all like him? Didn't want to take that chance.
Did it happen again?
No. I mean, I was very careful, but you know, it created a suspicion in me. Like I became a little wary of bosses. I think I became a little brittle. Like if somebody was hugging me, it was uncomfortable. So it was something that I carried with me for years, and not in a big way. It's not like a heavy thing, but it really pissed me off. And so when I learned about these rape allegations, I just, one, I realized that I probably got off easy. You know, I had resisted. I was very passive. So it was an unpleasant experience, but it wasn't a violent one. But two, the fact that what happened to me might not have ascended to the level of criminality, but let's face it, the facts of it are appalling. 54-year-old CEOs should not be hitting on 19-year-olds. They should not be taking them to remote homes north of Toronto and having sex with them. I mean, it's just so wrong on so many levels that I thought that this gave me the opportunity to explain the kind of man Stronach is and the kind of environment that existed at Magna, at Rooney's during that period of time, that it might be helpful to those women who had it far worse to know that they weren't alone, and also that I might be able to explain the infrastructure because my background is as a systems engineer. So as I've thought back about what happened, I see the systems. I see it was almost like a factory. I mean, the driver arriving as if on cue, the executive assistant having the house to offer, that house being empty. Like, what was that house doing empty even? If it's a corporate guest house and this is a big night at Magna and there were out of town visitors, like, what was it doing available for me to crash in?
So do you think it was premeditated?
I think I was just, I think it was opportunistic. He happened to encounter me on a night where he knew I wasn't doing anything. He knew the house was available because probably it was always available to him. And so he made it happen. And let's face it, it doesn't take a lot of work to impress an impressionable young woman. I mean, that 30 minutes in his office was all it really took to make me think that he viewed me as somebody special and important, and made me very receptive to the overture to join him at dinner. And
He sounds like he was almost like a mentor or a father figure.
it was, if somebody had told me he was a mentor, I would have jumped at it till he jumped me, obviously. He was somebody that I really admired, that I found fascinating. Let's face it, in the 80s, he had just sort of broken through in terms of his publicity and his persona on the Canadian business scene. And, you know, he was a rock star. There was a swagger to his walk. There was there was a lot to find very enticing about the character and the man Stronach as he appeared then. And I was as interested as anyone. I was excited that I was in a company that was so unorthodox, headed up by a guy who liked to think about an employee's bill of rights. Like, I like that there was like a bigger picture. It wasn't just, banging out car parts, that there was the context of manufacturing and the larger economy, what it means to be making things. It worked on all levels for me. And then it was, as a result, doubly devastating when I learned the truth about the man.
Did you consider going to HR?
I did. My mentor, when I first joined in the company, was the only woman executive at the company at the time who was the head of HR. And by the time this incident happened, she had left the company. She was there for maybe a year. And so I had seen what happens to women at the company. I didn't see longevity. And I thought briefly about speaking to her about what had happened. But once again, I thought that she would expect me to do something. And I had already decided that I would just stick my head down and get through it. I didn't want to be coached on how to accomplish a nice severance with Magna, because I would be the one who was leaving, right? It wouldn't be Stronach, the founder. It would be the young woman who had a problem. And, that was clear as day to me. Once I realized what was going on, I was disheartened, but I think, quite frankly, that my assessment was quite accurate, that the onus would have been on me to fix the problem, and the only way to fix the problem would be to leave.
Do you think that the assistant, the driver, the maitre d' were aware, knew what was going on, were part of a process, had done this before and will do it again?
I mean, the driver took my car. He knew how to do that. That would not surprise me in the least if it was part of his job. Moving cars around, delivering cars to the guest house, whatever. The assistant, I sometimes wonder if they weren't also victims. So who knows? Maybe she was just happy to have the night off. Don't know. We'll never know.
You said it changed your life. How did it change your life?
So I wanted to get out of Magna. That was pretty easy. Once I'd gotten my education, once I'd finished my degree, and I did that. I no longer wanted to work in the auto industry. It really soured me on cars.
You left the company and the industry.
I did. I studied technology and policy at MIT and wound up in the consumer product space and in consulting, and was really happy to leave manufacturing. I just decided these people are a little too hard-edged for me. I'm not cut out for this, and so I left.
Did your attitudes toward men change?
Well, as I said, my attitude toward bosses and men and figures of authority, I became a little suspicious of them, where previously I was very deferential and obedient, obviously, given that I gave up my car keys. It brought an edge into my perception of men, and something that I still sort of fight with. And it got me fascinated by issues of power, control, consent. And so these are topics that are present in my fiction. And, I hadn't thought about Stronach all that much in years, but, when the arrest came down, it was like this light bulb came off. I had a book coming out, so I reread it. I'm like, oh my God, I'm writing about Stronach here, even though I hadn't set out to write about him. I mean, there's a strong riff, a monologue at one point where she talks about consent having to take place between equals. I mean, that was based on my experience as a 19-year-old, because let's face it, I wasn't his equal.
Did you ever tell a boyfriend or a husband or someone about what happened, and what was their response?
Oh yes, absolutely. So I was sort of mum about it for several years, but once there was enough distance, whenever somebody would mention, especially if I ran into a Canadian and they found out I'd worked at Magna, oh, did you ever run into Frank Stronach? They would ask, and I'm like, oh yeah, let me tell you about Frank. And I've been very, very open and very, very determined to spread the truth about this man and how exploitative and coercive he was with me. So my husband was actually the person who told me about the arrest. He had received an email alert from the Baltimore Banner, of all things, but they follow Stronach because of his ownership of a racetrack. And so he got it in his email box and he walked right over to me and he's like, Jane, you got to read this. So I did. But he was the first of about 4 texts and emails. Like my friends all knew that this arrest would be very interesting to me because they've all heard this story about Stronach. And so that was the Friday night. And the Saturday morning, I called Peel Police and I said, I don't think what happened to me rose to the level of criminality, but let me tell you how it worked. And let me tell you the systems in place that facilitated his predation, because it was a pretty slick manufacturing operation there. All the cogs in the machine worked really well.
What motivated you to write the piece in the paper? Because it's a very, like this is a very personal, very descriptive, very thorough piece.
Well, write fiction. So I'm very comfortable as a storyteller, and I'm also very comfortable writing about topics that are explicit. So I knew that I had the capacity to discuss what had happened in a way that wouldn't be emotionally devastating to me personally. I can talk about this stuff. And then I remained pissed off about it. So that
This
is
is 30
part.
years later. How can you still be pissed off about it?
Uh, you know,
Some people
it's
would say,
it,
get over it.
some might, and I don't. It doesn't weigh heavily on me. But when I think about such an outrageous abuse of power, it reanimates that feeling of anger. Because let's face it, 19-year-olds. I mean, some of them are very sophisticated. They're ready to take on everything. But I think of that as a very pivotal moment for me. So a few months earlier, I had lost my virginity. So I'd had like sex maybe 3 times by the time I encountered Stronach. I think of the night where had that encounter with Stronach as the night I lost my innocence. It was a very big night in my imagination because all of a sudden I learned that people that I had respected and admired might actually be indifferent to me and exploitative, and they might use me in ways that I had never imagined. And that's a tough lesson to get when you're 19. I would have preferred to have learned that a little later in my life. So, you know, uh, I'm happy to see that there's now a spotlight on his behavior, because let's face it, you don't age out of culpability. And so if I can help explain his culpability, I'm happy to do so.
There's been lots of news of late in the last couple of years, I guess starting with the Me Too movement, but then starting with the Me Too movement as well, of numerous different people, Donald Trump being one of them, that have had, similar, Epstein being another. We could go on with the list. What is it? Do you think powerful men generally had a attitude that they could get away with things, or they had the right to do things, or have
Yes.
females changed their attitude of not being accepted? Or tell me how you analyze this in a historical sort of perspective, if you could.
All right. So the mores of the 80s were such that, if you were a powerful guy, you probably had a lot of volunteers. That's one of the things I don't understand about why I got sucked into the machine that night. There had to be lots of volunteers, but clearly he had a fondness for kind of, naive young women and, maybe a kind of a deflowering fantasy, who knows? But that was a period where there were a lot of men taking, and not always with consent. Because let's face it, the standard for consent has even changed. So now the gold standard for sexual consent is an enthusiastic yes. That's what everybody's going for. Back then, the standard for consent was an emphatic no, and somebody had to be covered in scratches and bruises. Otherwise, it didn't qualify as a rape, right? So what happened to me, I categorized as a bad night. That's how I thought about it. And, if you're a woman of a certain age, sooner or later, you get a couple bad nights under your belt. And I happened to get mine at 19. So the standards for consent have changed over time. We are now much more aware of what it means to say no, what it means not to say anything, which is where I fell in the matter, and what it means to say yes. And we want a yes. So the other thing that's happened, I think, is that women are not feeling as much shame about talking about their sexual experiences, and even their bad ones. There used to be a reliance on the fact that we didn't want to talk about having had sex with somebody. I had sex with Frank Stronach, and I wish I hadn't. I was 19, he was 54. The deck was stacked against me, and I was just relieved when it was over. So that's changed. And I think what we're also seeing is that for a while I was worried Me Too had died. Brett Kavanaugh made it to the US Supreme Court, despite Christy Blasey Ford's testimony about his bad behavior. A bunch of pretty awful guys sort of seem to have gotten away with things, including Trump. But I'm heartened that, for instance, this past week we saw Sean Combs, his bad behavior being called out in a pretty compelling way. He's in jail right now. Al Fayed's reputation is being corrected. And obviously Stronach in Canada. I mean, I think Canada sort of hits above its weight in terms of sexual predators. Nygaard, for instance. God, what a disaster he was. So what I think is fantastic about this process is that it's a warning to future predators. It's telling them that you think you may be able to, get women to sign NDAs, that you can buy up the awful video, you can do whatever's necessary to kind of hide your bad behavior. But the rules change, and the force field you use to protect your privacy and your predation is brittle. It could crack at any moment, and when it does, it's going to explode. So that's what's happened with Stronach. It started with 3 women. Now it's 10. I've spoken out about my own experiences. Who knows what else is coming down the pipe? But it's they can't stop it once it starts, and so they should not start to begin with.
And I guess we should say that none of these allegations have been proven in court. Is that correct?
None have.
And
I'm not a criminal complainant, but I have
a story
spoken to the police.
And so we should say that under our judicial system, people are innocent until proven guilty. But your story is pretty scary.
I wish it hadn't happened, but it did, and so I'm willing to do my part to make sure it happens less often. And so that's why I'm talking to you, Brian. Just a warning shot to any guys out there thinking about sleazing on young women, especially young employees. If you're not, and like, ask them if they want to do this. the bar is really low for doing it right. So do it right. Otherwise, who knows what you're going to face when you're in your 90s.
Is there a negative side to this? Let me just ask you. So I had a general counsel at one point in time that came to me and said that, Brian, never have a meeting with a young female employee with your door closed. Always leave the door open. Is that good advice?
I'm not gonna question what your general counsel tells you. And maybe you leave the door open for everybody. If you really want to be cautious. Uh, you know, whatever helps you sleep at night, so long as it doesn't impede the career progress of your associates. I mean, do what you got to do.
I spoke with one person at one time who said that they had had numerous different sort of borderline Me Too experiences. And she said that, and she's probably a comparable age to you. She said that we learned how to just turn people down, and maybe it was like your biting of the finger, but that you had to deal with it, and you had to learn how to turn people down. You think that's fair?
At 19, I just didn't have those skills yet. Like if that had happened when I was 22 or 23, I would have been much more deft. I would have known to how to navigate that terrain much better. But he caught me at a point where I was very clueless, very naive. You know, I was a straight A student. I was a nerd. I was not like a kid who went out a lot. I mean, hadn't dated much. I mean, it was really, you know, far outside of my comfort zone and far beyond my norm to be sitting at that table with the CEO of the company that was paying my way through school. It was just
I have another friend
unprecedented.
who I told you had a circumstance which, frankly, I think is far worse than yours, because I do think it reaches the level of criminality, though nothing happened. And she found it very difficult to ever create relationships with men or trust men thereafter. But you seem to have done okay.
Changes. Yeah, no, I have a wonderful husband. I've dated wonderful men. And but I've always told them about this Frank encounter. I mean, if you've known me long enough, you've probably heard about the time I bit Frank Stronach. I mean, it's just part of my lore. It's a favorite story of mine because it's just so bizarre. And quite frankly, I've often told of it for laughs because, you know, it's so ridiculous. I mean, what was I even doing at that table to begin with? I mean, it was such a bizarre night. It was so wrong and so outrageous on so many levels that, you know, I sort of almost treat it as a joke. But, you know, I got off easy. There were a lot of women, apparently, who did not.
If you had said no, if you had fought back, would it have been rape?
There are a bunch of women who who say they did exactly that and had that as the outcome. So
it's interesting how that, you know, your comments about consent and how consent has changed, and you clearly didn't consent, but you also have the attitude of it didn't reach the level of criminality. You know, what's the question of what would you have had to have done to say no, and to make it rape?
I had turned him down twice by the time the driver appeared at the table to take my car. I declined the guest house and twice. So how many times do you have to say no before the no sticks? Or is that just good salesmanship where you just blow through the no and get to the yes? And in which case, I never really said yes. I was just like, oh my goodness, here are my keys. Okay, I guess we're doing this. But I never verbalized it. I was just sort of dumbstruck, sitting next to him in the car and silently freaking out.
Did he use protection?
He did not. So that was a lingering gift from him too. So several months later, I came down with my very first yeast infection. And I'd never had one before. So I immediately attributed it to the unprotected sex that I had with Stronach. And I thought for sure I'd picked up an STI. And of course, in my imagination, because I was like a teenager, it had to be one of the really bad ones. I was sure I'd picked up syphilis or something. And my life was a little chaotic because I was bouncing back and forth. So it took me a while to get to a clinic to get tested. And fortunately, it was negative. I'm still not sure how that happened, but it was a pretty brief encounter. So there is that. Um, so that was a concern. And then you have to remember, 86 was at the dawn of the HIV problem. So every now and then, for a few years afterwards, I would have this intrusive thought, like, did he give me HIV? Like, how and when can I get tested for this so that I can put my mind at ease? And once again, negative. And now we better understand, the risk factors. Heterosexual sex, if there's nobody who's a drug user, that it's a little different. But back in the 80s, we didn't really understand, who could do this. And since I felt certain I wasn't the only one he'd had unprotected sex with, I just didn't know.
Were you worried about
so
pregnancy?
that haunted me for a while until I got the clean bill of health. I mean, I'm still amazed that I got through it
Were you
without
worried about
picking up
pregnancy?
anything. Pardon me?
Were you worried about pregnancy?
No, I was on the pill. I had gotten on the pill even before I became sexually active because I am a planner. I mean, that's the kind of kid I was. And so I was not worried about pregnancy. But all that other stuff sure weighed heavily on me.
Up until the time of this indictment and the stories about all the other people, had you talked to other people that had a experience with Frank Stronach, or did you think you were the only one?
Sure, I was not the only one, but there were a couple women that I wondered who would work close to him who were really, really gorgeous, but I was never going to say, oh, by the way, did you have sex with Frank Stronach too? I mean, I just wasn't going to go there since it was something that I wanted to put behind me. So no, I never discussed, being in bed with Stronach with anyone else who'd had that experience.
We're having an interesting conversation with Jane Boon about her experiences with Frank Stronach, but we're also talking about sort of changed attitudes in regards to power, consent, the Me Too movement, and frankly, resilience. That you seem to have, even though you've had this terrible experience, and you say it's changed your life, you've done okay. You've come through it, and so I think there's probably a good story of resilience as well.
I like where I landed. I mean, if I had a shitty life, I might feel a little differently about the whole Frankscapade. But I adore my husband. We live really well. I have great friends. But there was this pretty awful thing that happened to me when I was 19, and I take no joy in revisiting it, but it's, I think, helpful for people to understand how this stuff can happen, and also that it did happen. And it was exploitative and coercive, and frankly, he should have known better. He was 54 years old and I was 19. I mean, what was he thinking?
What was he thinking? We're going to take a final break, and come back with I want to ask Jane a little bit about her novels. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We've been having, quite an interesting conversation, I think, with Jane Boon about her experience that she wrote about in an article in a column in the paper just last week about her experience when she was 19 with the then 54-year-old Frank Stronach, the CEO, chairman of Magna. And she's not suggesting that it was criminal, but it was certainly something that was inappropriate that happened, and it certainly adds to the background to the stories of late in regards to the allegations and the indictment of Frank Stronach for sexual assault, etc. Before we go, Jane, you're a novelist, I understand. Tell us if you could, a little bit about some of your books and where we might
So,
find them.
so I just published my second novel. It's called Bold Strokes, and my first one was called Edge Play. And one of the games that people play, especially with first novels, is to try and figure out what demons the author is exercising by writing them. And if you read Edge Play carefully, with themes of power, control, there's S&M in it, so it's a little risque, but also kind of gender roles. You might see where my imagination was inspired when I was 19, because topics of power, control, consent are throughout them. So the latest book is Bold Strokes, and it's set in the world of art. My protagonist is an art gallery owner by day, dominatrix by night, and she's trying to navigate through the financial crisis of 2008, while her criminal father is trying to get her embroiled in a scheme. So it's a fun read. It's a beach read for smart people. So
A beach read for smart people. Where can we find them?
Amazon is probably your easiest. I'm not sure where it's carried in Canada, but it's a very it's a frisky book. It moves pretty fast, a lot of plot, and the characters are well. I just got recommended. I was an editor's pick for Airmail this week, so people seem to like it.
Fantastic. And remind us the two titles.
Edge Play was the first, which is 50 Shades of Grey meets Big Short. And then Bold Strokes explores the convergence of the art industry and the sex industry.
Fascinating. Jane, what do you think is going to happen after the writing of your column last week? And
there's a big court date coming up, so that'll be interesting. I think the lawyer is trying to get the proceedings moved to York out of Peel. I don't know if that'll happen, but I'm following it very closely because, I'm fascinated, and so the guy just turned 92. I don't think that the actuarials are such that he'll ever go to jail, but I think the last few years of his life are going to be embroiled in legal wrangling, and it'll be a corrective to his reputation. So I think it's a very specific kind of justice, but I'll take it.
Jane, thank you so much for sharing your story, both in the paper and with us today. I really appreciate it. I think that it's an interesting commentary, as you've said, on changed attitudes toward consent, changed attitudes toward control and power and influence, and changed attitudes toward sexual encounters.
And in the workplace, I mean, I just always thought of what happened to me as an example of workplace sexual harassment. I mean, let's face it, CEOs should not be, hitting on interns, but it's bigger than that.
Jane Boon, thanks so much. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from New York City, at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos get posted on social media as soon as the radio show goes to air. Thank you, Jane. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. Thanks.